It's time to make it, just give it a try. 'Cause you can make it like the old fat guy.
Thanks for stopping by today's show of You Can Make It. I'm David Farrell, the old fat guy, and I'm going to make some cookies today. I just like cookies. But I'm going to do something a little different. I really like peanut butter cookies, but if you make peanut butter cookies, I find they get a little dense and they're a little heavy. And if you make chocolate chip cookies, I find all you taste is butter and the chocolate chip. So I thought I'd kind of try and marry the two together. I'm going to make a chocolate chip style dough. I'm going to put some peanuts in with the chocolate chips, and I'm going to add just a touch of peanut butter to give a little bit more complexity to the cookie dough to go with the chocolate chips. It's really easy to make cookies. Let's get right into it with no further ado. We're going to start off with some dry ingredients, and here I have 425 milliliters or 1 3/4 cups of flour, which weighs about 216 to 220 grams. Weighing is easier. If you're measuring flour without weighing, you have to put it into a measure and flatten the top and make sure it doesn't get packed down or you'll get too much of it. But I've got the 425 milliliters of flour in the bowl, and I'm going to add to it 5 milliliters of baking soda, 2 milliliters of baking powder, and 1 milliliter of salt. So that'd be 1 teaspoon of baking soda, 1/2 teaspoon of baking powder, and 1/4 teaspoon of salt. And just put those in with the flour. And then you want to mix it thoroughly. And we'll just set that aside until we're ready for it. The next thing you have to do when making cookies is cream butter. The idea of creaming butter is to take soft butter and beat it till it's almost creamy, and then when you add sugar to it, it dissolves in instead of just lumping up with it. Now I have in this bowl 175 milliliters or 3/4 cup of butter. And because I want a little bit of peanut flavor, I also have here 75 milliliters or 1/3 cup of peanut butter that I'm going to add to cream in with the butter. Once I have the peanut butter in, we just turn our beater on and let it run for about 30 seconds. The idea is you want to get it nice and light and fluffy. Make sure you give it a scrape down every once in a while just to keep a good mixture and stop anything from getting stuck to the sides. So there we go. There's the first one, and we'll just beat it for about 30 seconds more. Once it's light and fluffy, we're just going to add our sugars. And what I have here is 150 milliliters or 2/3 cup of white sugar. But you don't just want one kind of sweet in your cookie, you need two. So I have here 150 milliliters or 2/3 cup of brown sugar. And you just want to add that to the butter. And we're going to start mixing it slowly because we don't want the sugar to bounce out. Forgot to lock it up. That shows you how stupid this cook is. There we go. And once it's starting to go a little smoother, just give it a little bit higher speed. And we're going to scrape the bowl down. And you can see how the sugar isn't clumping. It's just mixed in nicely with the butter. And we'll just scrape that off of our scraper here. and give it a few more seconds of beating. That thumping you're hearing is just because I had some big chunks of brown sugar in there. They'll dissolve in eventually. There we go. Okay, now that you've got it all nicely mixed up, you're just going to add 1 egg. And again, give it about another 30 seconds of stirring. We'll just scrape the bowl once more. And the last ingredient that goes in with your cream butter is some vanilla. I like to add about 3 milliliters or a little over half a teaspoon of vanilla to my cookies. Exactly 3 milliliters. And stir that in thoroughly. And we're now ready to add our dry ingredients and make it into a cookie dough. Now, in the old days, one of the biggest treats for a kid was to lick the batter in the cookie dough and to lick the spatula. You can't really do that safely. You see, the problem is we now know that raw eggs have salmonella in them, so it's not safe to eat the cookie dough. If you're feeling brave, go ahead, but it's not really safe. So we'll just take the dry ingredients and we'll just pour them in to the batter. And here it's really important that you start really slow because the flour is going to want to puff up. So we'll just go a little bit at a time until it starts to, there we go, until it starts to mix in with the butter to make a dough. Now it's really important you don't overmix it. You're just trying to get all the ingredients together because if you overmix it, you get gluten out of the flour and the cookies will be tough. So, again, give it a scrape down the edges to get all the flour in. And we'll give it another few seconds stir. And now that it's all combined, we'll just scrape it back into the bowl, and we're going to add the magic ingredients. Some chocolate chips and some peanuts. Now, I have 350 milliliters, or 1.5 cups, of semi-sweet chocolate chips that we'll add in. I like lots of chocolate chips in my cookies. And for a little bit more complexity, I have here 150 milliliters, or two-thirds of a cup of unsalted peanuts. And just put that in and give it a slow stir because you don't want to break up the peanuts and the chocolate chips. There we go. Now, you can do all this by hand. It's just a lot more work, but it makes this perfectly good cookie. So I'm just going to get all of the dough off of the mixer. And what we'll do from this is I'm going to get my cookie sheets out and prepare them. So just give me a minute. So I took my dough off the mixer and I just got it here, and I have 2 cookie sheets. I'll most likely need more than 2, but it'll be a good start. And we just need to just give it a quick spray with baking spray. The cookies have a lot of fat in it, would likely be okay, but this just makes them come off a bit easier. And then you want to take balls about the size of a walnut and put them about 2 inches apart on the cookie sheet. Do not try and get them perfect. People buy special scoops so that every cookie's the same size and whatever. To me, that just makes it look like store-bought cookies. We're making homemade cookies. I'm just finishing off putting the last of the cookies on the tray. and these will be going into a preheated 375-degree oven. Now, I like to switch the racks around between the top and the bottom one after I put them in about halfway through, just so they get an equal cooking. So let's just put these in the oven. And they're going to cook for about 10 minutes. I cooked the cookies for about 10 to 11 minutes. You just want some nice browning on the bottom. You can see they got a nice crinkled surface on them. These look like a cookie you want in your cookie jar. But of course, now we have to try one, so let's just have a taste. Nice and crispy on the outside, a soft, moist center, nice hit of chocolate, and it doesn't have that just butter and sugar taste that you get from a chocolate chip cookie. The peanut butter doesn't make it taste like a peanut butter cookie, but it adds a richness to the cookie that you don't get in most chocolate chip cookies. This is a great peanut chocolate chip cookie, and the best part is you can make it. In today's recipe, I make peanut chocolate chip cookies. The ingredients are 425 milliliters flour, 2 milliliters baking powder, 5 milliliters baking soda, 1 milliliter salt, 175 milliliters softened butter, 75 milliliters chunky peanut butter, 150 milliliters sugar, 150 milliliters packed brown sugar, 1 egg, 3 milliliters vanilla, 350 milliliters semi-sweet chocolate chips, 150 milliliters unsalted peanuts. Get the full recipe at my blog, oldfatguy.ca.
It's time to make it. Just give it a try. 'Cause you can make it like the old fat guy.
Welcome to this show of You Can Make It. I'm David Farrell, the old fat guy. I'm going to make something absolutely delicious today, which is rib tips. If you've ever had Chinese barbecue pork, you'll love this appetizer. And it's easy to make and it's inexpensive because I make it out of rib tips, which are the cuttings from when you make St. Louis style ribs. You either cut them off of a full rack of ribs yourself, or sometimes when you buy your ribs in the store, there'll be a nice even rack on top, and below that will be a bunch of cartilage pieces. Use the cartilage pieces to make rib tips and cook the ribs. So all I've done is started by making a marinade, and I've put in this bowl 175 milliliters or 3/4 of a cup of soy sauce, 50 milliliters or 1/4 cup of hoisin sauce, 5 milliliters or 1 teaspoon of 5-spice, 8 milliliters of sriracha sauce, which is an oriental hot sauce. You can also use 3 milliliters or a half teaspoon of hot pepper sauce if you prefer, and 375 milliliters or 1.5 cups of brown sugar. Now, you'll note the brown sugar doesn't totally dissolve. You're looking to make a slurry. Chinese barbecued pork dishes and char siu are known for being really sweet, and that's the reason there's so much brown sugar. Now, another thing you could do is add about half a teaspoon to a teaspoon of red food coloring, because traditionally char siu comes out very red. I do that when I make char siu pork. I don't do it so much when I do rib tips because they're smaller pieces, but it's just a matter of personal choice. If you like your rib tips bright red, put in the food coloring. And now that I've put the ingredients for the marinade together, I just have to put my rib tips in. And what we want to do is take the chunks of the pork cuttings and cut them into 1 to 1.5 inch squares. They will shrink up a little bit on cooking. And just put those into the marinade. So I've got all the pork put into the marinade, and I'm just going to toss it around to get it nicely coated. And these will sit in the refrigerator covered overnight, and I'll turn them every hour or two just to make sure they get good coating on them, and tomorrow we'll start to cook them up. So I'll see you tomorrow. I preheated my smoker to 230 degrees Fahrenheit, and I took the rib tips and I put them on a plate after I took them out of the marinade, just so some of the marinade can drain off them. Also, I've saved the marinade because we're going to use it later, so don't throw that out. Now let's just put the rib tips in the smoker. You want them far enough apart that smoke can get all around each of them. You can also do the ribs in a 230 degree Fahrenheit oven, but they won't have any smoke flavor, but they'll still be absolutely delicious. Once the ribs are in the smoker, I'm going to let them smoke for 3 hours at 230 degrees Fahrenheit. My rib tips have been in the smoker for 3 hours at 230 degrees Fahrenheit. Now I'm going to take the marinade that we reserved. I put the rib tips in a pan, and I'm going to pour the marinade over the top. Now normally you wouldn't reuse a marinade because the pork would have contaminated it, but this is going to be cooking for several hours, so it will be fine because it'll cook out. Now I'm going to cover the pan with foil. And what we're going to do is put this back in the smoker for 2 hours to let the moist heat soften up the rib tips. So this will go back in for 2 hours, and I'll come back and show you what we do with the ribs after they smoke for 2 more hours with moisture under the foil. The rib tips have been cooking under foil for 2 hours, and now I'm going to take them out and just put them directly on the grill for another hour. So just give me a moment here. So I put the rib tips out of the liquid under the foil and back on the grill for a little less than an hour. Actually did about 40 minutes. You gotta look at them. When they're good and dark, it's fine. But you want to brush them once more with some of the liquid out of the pan just to give them a really good glaze. And now comes the best part, trying them. So let's take one of our rib tips and give it a taste. Oh, The meat is so tender, but with the delicious crust. It's sweet, almost like a candy, and only pork can get away with this much sweetness. It's absolutely delicious. The fat is really rendered out, so it's just creamy in your mouth. This is a delicious char siu rib tip, and the best part is you can make it.
In this episode, David made char siu rib tips. Use 1 to 2 kilograms of spare rib trimmings, 175 milliliters of soy sauce, 50 milliliters of hoisin, 5 milliliters of 5-spice, 8 milliliters of sriracha, and 375 milliliters of brown sugar. For the complete recipe, visit David's blog at oldfatguy.ca. And remember, you can make it. It's time to make it. Just give it a try. 'Cause you can make it like the old fat guy.
In this episode of You Can Make It, the old fat guy, me, isn't going to cook anything. I'm going to show you how to trim St. Louis ribs. The cheapest way to buy spare ribs is in a whole rack. They're much cheaper that way. This rack was about $4 a kilogram, and a rack of trimmed St. Louis ribs is about $12 a kilogram. What makes a St. Louis rib is The whole rack has this breastbone and cartilage in it. It has this flap on it. It has some garbage flap meat at the end. And that's kind of hard to eat around. So if you cut that off, you end up with a nice rack that is easier to eat. That's what St. Louis style ribs are. They're quite easy to make. Let me show you how. So we've got the whole rack, and you'll note there's this kind of fatty flap along there. You want to cut that off because it doesn't look good. And the whole purpose of St. Louis ribs is to make them look good. So take a very sharp knife and cut that off. The next thing you're going to notice is that there's ribs here and then cartilage and bone up here. And one of the ribs is the largest rib in the rack, and it goes the farthest. And that's that one. You can feel a knuckle right there. So we're going to cut just above that knuckle to take all this cartilage and fat off. But the difficulty is that you want it to look good. So you'll notice this straight edge along here. You want to find that longest rib, and you want to cut kind of parallel to the flat edge along here. So you're going to take a heavy chef's knife and just work your way through the cartilage. Just rock it back and forth until you cut through. And then keep going in a straight line parallel to that bottom edge. Just work it through, just press down and you'll get through the cartilage. There we go. And keep going till you get all the way through and have a parallel line that makes two pieces of straight meat. Just like that. Now these trimmings aren't going to get thrown out. I'm going to use them for rib tips, which I've done in another episode, and you can watch there. So now you've got a nice rack with two parallel edges, but you still have this flappy piece here. So you want to find the last piece of really nice bone, which is right about there, and you want to cut the flap off and use it for rib tips too. And there you have a nice, beautiful St. Louis style rib that when you cook it will be easy to eat and it'll look really pretty. And the best part is you can make it.